since we got the Stormy Archer hub all taken apart, cleaned, and put back together, we might as well go ahead and finish the entire rear wheel and put that all back together. We'll see how much of that we can get done on this episode. But first, if you recall from last season, I had so much trouble with that nut on the crank. We'll see if we can get it off on this bicycle. That's what's happening on this episode of Featherstone Bicycles. Okay, so if you recall from last season, it was a little bit different setup because it was a multi-speed bicycle, chain rings. But to get this last piece off the crank, there's this nut here that has just two flats, basically a circle with two flats. And I had a heck of a time trying using the big crescent wrench, took it to two different bike shops. The first bike shop I went to could not do it. I put heat on it, couldn't do it. Took it to the second bike shop, which I mentioned in the video last season, and put it in the vise just like this, just like I had it. Put the crescent wrench on it, came right off. I couldn't believe it. So let's see how this works. I've had this, by the way, penetrating oil soaking on this for a few days. There it goes. No problem. So, happy to report that. If you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know what the drill is on the spokes. We clean them entirely on the wire wheel, put the nipple on, clean the nipple, and then they're ready to go. It's a particularly dirty job. It's also dangerous using small parts like this on a wire wheel, so wear glasses, safety glasses, and also have a mask because these spokes are very greasy, dirty as they came off that rear wheel where that hub is, and it had probably leaked some oil and grease from the chain over time. So there's going to be a lot of greasy, dusty particles, dirty particles flying around. So I have to put the mask on. Okay, spokes are done, so we're going to start on the wheel, on the rim, and it's pretty rusty, as most of them are, based on last season's bike, I tended to screw up my wrist a little bit, had some symptoms of carpal tunnel syndrome. So I'm going to try something a little different. Got a couple wire wheels on a drill here, and see if that relieves the pressure of the steel wool running around the rim. Well, that turned out really well. I cannot believe it took me 15 years to think of that, and starting to save a lot of wrist trouble from that. Show you how that came out. Hopefully some of that's coming in the video. But not only was it less strain on my wrist, but it took a lot less time. So we'll be using that method in the future. We're ready to put the spokes back in. And before we do that, I'm going to button up the Sturmey Archer hub, put a little Teflon on these threads, and a little grease on that cone, because I'm going to put the oil in to the hub. And if you don't have these two cones on, it will drip out. And you just do these hand tight and then back it off about a quarter. And I'd already put that one in the last episode. Now, I think I said in an earlier episode that I was using a non-detergent lubricating oil. This is one I just picked up, I think, at Walmart a couple years ago. And I have that here. But after reviewing the so-called experts on the internet about what kind of oil and how you should be lubing this, again, it's always oil, never grease. If you think about it, it's a transmission. It's got a clutch, it's got gears. So I also happen to notice on my shelf, I had some automatic transmission fluid. And of course, for the life of me, I can't remember the last time I took one of these apart, cleaned it, and put it back together, whether I used the transmission fluid or I used the lubricating oil. Again, the so-called experts on the internet seem to be split. Some say to use a sewing machine oil, which I also have. But I just don't think it's going to matter much. So I'm going to go with the automatic transmission fluid. They also seem to be split on, or divided, I should say, on how much to use. I've always heard that something I read the other day said 2 to 3 ounces, fluid ounces. That seems like an awful lot to be in there. I've always just also heard, a teaspoonful. So I'm just going to pour a little bit in the cap. I've got a little syringe here. That seems like that's about a teaspoonful. And I just have to drip it in there slowly, because again, this syringe won't fit into that hole. True the wheel like we did last season. So we're going to start by getting all the nipples up just to where the thread disappears. right, we've got it trued up, and because it's the rear wheel, you can see that because we've got more things on the right side here, in order for the wheel to sit straight in the frame, the dishing, and again that is the way the spokes line up in the center here, and then they span out because the distance between the spoke holes on the hub are wider than, of course, they are on the rim. They're almost centered on the rim. The spokes travel outwards, and so that's called the dish. And the dish on the rear wheel has to be biased to the non-drive side because you've got the sprocket over here that the chain will be on. So there's a little bit. Well, I thought we'd be able to get the whole wheel together today, but when I started to do that after we had trued it up, I realized that I was going to have to get new rim strips. I was just at the bicycle store yesterday and I forgot to do that, so I'm going to have to do that today or tomorrow and save the final assembly of the rear wheel until the next episode. In the meantime, thanks for sticking with me, and I hope to see you next week on Featherstone Bicycles.